The mission of New Roots Co. is to provide healthy, sustainable food access throughout Eagle River Valley through education, outreach, and partnership. Our vision is to cultivate a community in Eagle River Valley where every individual has access to local, nourishing, and sustainable food resources. So I wanted to start this lesson off by explaining why we are growing these beds here locally and providing for the community this way. According to the UN, local, sustainable, and organic farming is the only way to reliably feed the human race for the foreseeable future. We have to use local, organic methods in order to actually dependably feed ourselves. This is an example of a biodiverse, local, and organic bed. And there are various other reasons why we want to use those kind of principles too. Small-scale, local agriculture, although it's the exact opposite of the traditional large-scale monocropping style we see, it is the only dependable way because it's more resilient, it's less susceptible to climate change, it is healthier for the soil and the body, it fosters independence for everyone who's involved, it grows community, it grows everyone in the city, it brings everyone together. It provides purpose and responsibility, and it connects one with nature, and on top of all the other therapeutic and other personal benefits that come from putting your hands in the soil and gardening. And so we want to use these two beds to just demonstrate those values and the things that you can actually gain from just putting your hands in the dirt and gardening for yourself at home, even in a rugged environment such as Colorado. The first concept I want you to remember is to put the right plant in the right place. Up here in Colorado, we have a very specific climate that only allows certain plants to grow and flourish in this environment. We have a very high alkaline soil, it's very clay-like, doesn't drain very well, and we also have a very short growing season on top of actually very dry seasons too. So that all combined makes this growing season up here in Colorado very difficult in the Rockies. But with the right plant in the right place, you can take advantage of these things and amend the soil to the way that actually is preferred by your plants. If you always start with the plants that are appropriate for this environment, you're already off to a good start. So certain plants to always consider for Colorado and the high Rockies are always going to be root vegetables like your carrots, your radishes, and your brassicas and mustards like your arugula, your spinach, and your lettuce, and your Swiss chard, and your broccoli, things like that. Another good family is your peas and beans, your legumes. They actually tend to do very well up here. So as you see in this plot, I've got spinach, arugula, carrot, radish, snow peas, and over there I've actually got some squash going, because squash actually tends to do pretty well up here too. They're pretty resilient. So these are the types of plants you want to start with if you're actually not intending to amend the soil too much. If you do intend to grow something like tomatoes, peppers, or other things that don't tend to do so well in the cold up here, you're going to have to do things to amend your soil and to amend the environment around you. You have to make sure that they are in the environment that they prefer to be into. That is the concept of the right plant in the right place. So always make sure you keep note of the position of the sun, where the wind is flowing, where your garden bed is, what type of soil you have, and all the other factors you can come in contact with while you're in the environment you're going to grow in. In this bed you can see the sun is positioned just about this way and moves from east to west over that way. In that way, I've designed my garden to have the shortest plants furthest to the north, or furthest to the south, and the tallest plants furthest to the north, because that way the sun will have this layering effect all throughout the garden. Nothing is being shaded out by the tall plants, and the short plants are getting all the sun that they need. The same goes for my other plot over here. You just want to layer your plants from short to tall. In continuation of the concept of right plant in the right place, when you're searching for varieties of plants to get, always look for things that are frost tolerant and harvest within 60 or so days up here in Colorado, because we have a very short growing season, so you want to make sure that they have a very short fruiting period. These radishes are a very good variety for this environment, and so this is a really good packet to go and consider. When buying new starts and new seed packets, always make sure to read the instructions and pay close attention to the environment they wish to grow in. These cherry bells are actually quite good for here, and they only take about 5 to 10 days to emerge. Make sure you only plant them to about a ½ inch in depth. I usually give them about 2 seeds per planting. And if you go any deeper, they're probably not going to make it up. Seed spacing is about 1 inch, and row spacing is about 1 or 12 inches, but you do not have to deal with that if you're going to be growing in a variety like this, because you are not going to be walking down the rows. So don't worry about the row spacing as much as the seed spacing. Thinning is the concept of pulling the extras out when you do place more than 1 seed and they both germinate. If you have 2 seeds too close together, it's good to just make the Sophie's choice and pick the one that's going to live a little bit better. It's a good idea to start some seedlings at home before the last frost date, so that you can actually take advantage of growing before the spring really sets in. In this case, we've sown our seeds in situ, so we had to make sure to come by and water them twice daily so that they stay saturated in their seedling life. As they get older, you can water less frequently and a lot deeper, because their roots are now a lot larger, more vibrant, and spreading much deeper into the soil. Until that point, after the first week or so, you still need to go ahead and water them twice daily, very reliably. The second major lesson I want you to take home with you is to remember the 4 basic needs of any plant, which are water, sun, soil, and oxygen. Most people forget about that oxygen part. Stunting is the most common result of ever having too much or too little of those 4 things. Whenever people have problems with their tomatoes or their cauliflower or something not growing large enough, typically it's because they're watering too often or too little, there's not enough sun, the soil is in poor health, or there's no oxygen in the soil. So, I want to start by talking about water first, out of those 4 things. It's kind of the lifeblood of all of it, I feel like, besides the soil. Those 2 are very like brothers and sisters in terms of scalability. With water, you want to always remember to slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in. Those are the 3 S's you should always carry with you with water. Take your time, make sure it sinks into the soil and gets the soil nice and moist to a very deep level. When you have very large plants like your different squash and rhubarbs and your cauliflowers and your broccolis, once they get really large, they're going to be so deep into the soil that you're going to need to make sure that the water sinks reliably to that depth. So that's why it's important to take your time, let it slow down, spread, and sink in. You don't want to use a high pressure hose and just blast the heck out of your plants, because they're not going to like that. So you want to make sure you're nice and gentle to your plants. Make the soil nice and soft. You don't want to blow any of the really healthy organic matter here on top away. You want it to stay right there, so you just shower it nice and slowly. Once or twice daily, morning and afternoon, those are the best times to water your plants, because you avoid the midday sun and you avoid that chance of burning your plants and the chance of having a lot of your water just evaporate, which is just wasteful. So seedlings, they require a little bit more frequent watering, like we said earlier, so make sure you get them about twice a day. But once your plants are pretty large, you can kind of step off of them a little bit, let them have a chance to dry out, because that actually is the best chance for them to grow. Larger plants, they do need less watering, but make sure you do it deep. Those 3 S's, slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in. In keeping with that concept of slowing it down, spreading it out, and sinking it in, we have below me what's called an olla, spelled O-L-L-A. It's an old Spanish traditional method of irrigation, very low tech and very conservative with water. Right here, we have this terracotta pot that is buried up to its neck below the surface of the soil. Inside, it's filled with water, which is very slowly radiating out into the soil, where I have neighboring tomatoes and even a radish here, which is very happy with the amount of water it's been getting. What this does is it slowly irrigates the land at the rate that the soil requires it. Only when the soil is dry does the Oya release water. It's a very cool, low-tech system. Next topic is sun. Always pay close attention to the location of the sun relative to your plot. It's good to arrange your plot in a way that's east-west orienting so that you get the full benefit of the sun throughout the day. It's also important to notice the different aspects of the sun in the different times of the day. For instance, the north side of your bed is going to be typically the coolest side because it's not going to get any sun except from the south side. So anything north of these snow peas is going to be a little bit cooler than anything south of them. So I've made it in such a way that everything north of it isn't even a garden plot. Also keep in mind the east-facing sun and the south-facing sun are the best, most beneficial sides for any garden bed. The north and the west side typically are the coolest or two hottest actually. The west side has that scorching afternoon sun which tends to bake things, so it's actually a good idea to consider even putting a trellis on that western end so that we can shade the plot and protect it from that westerly sun. The south and east are your two best friends in terms of sun. Since we have a very short growing season up here in Colorado, we have to maximize the amount of sun that we do get. So we only have about 90 some days of actual growing season. And so what we do is we make hoop houses and other little domes like these to make sure that our growing season lasts a little bit longer. The concepts of soil and air I like to combine together because they typically work together. The soil and air are both beneath the plants and interacting with the roots. It's important to have very, very healthy soil, and it's important to make sure your soil is aerated appropriately too. You don't want to drown your roots. As much as they want water, they do want oxygen just as well. It's actually one of the most common problems for early gardeners is to drown their plants. So more isn't always better. Remember to slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in. When you're looking at soil, brown and black like that is like really good. That's the magic stuff right there. You want it to be kind of humusy. You don't want it to be really sandy. You don't want it to be very clay-like. You don't want it to just run through your fingers like sand does. You don't want water to just not be retained. You want it to have some good texture to it. What that texture is that's really good is what we like to call loam or humus. It's a really cool living thing that's actually filled with life. Third major lesson for today is to remember that it all comes back to the soil. A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself, according to Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. All life on our planet is really dependent on a very thin layer of soil. It's a very vibrant ecosystem that actually feeds the rest of the planet. Much like our atmosphere, our oceans, and all the other biospheres that we have, the soil is just as important, if not the most important. The importance cannot be overstated. Poor soil health leads to desertification, dust bowls, famine, ecological decline, wilderness decline, wildlife decline. It's just overall a detriment to your society, to the ecology, to the planet, to disregard the health of the soil. So proper stewardship, care, and maintenance of the land is required and is the only way for us to sustain ourselves and our food systems. In fact, we can actually actively heal the atmosphere and all the other biospheres with regenerative landscaping techniques. We can regenerate the soil, regenerate the atmosphere, regenerate everything as long as we use proper techniques. According to the Colorado State University Extension, soil is composed of sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. Each component varies greatly from place to place. Soils are important because they hold moisture and nutrients which are needed for vegetation and crops to grow. Soil types vary in their water holding capacity and their productivity. Each soil is composed of those four main things: sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. This has plenty of organic matter, and organic matter is that magical concept in all of it, because all soils have those same three particles which are basically inert: clay, sand, and silt. They have mineral compositions, but they don't really have much else going for them. They're not alive. And the organic matter is the living component, which is your carbon and your nitrogen-rich stuff. That is the magic number that you want to have only about 5% of in your soil to reliably feed your soil for the growing season. If you keep that in mind, that special 5% of organic matter, which can be applied through many different methods, like top dressing, through green manure, through composting, and all sorts of other methods. You do not have to synthetically amend your soil. You can amend your soil organically to make sure that it is feeding all of your vegetation through the growing season. These are the important concepts to remember. So the main difference between sand, silt, and clay, and the only difference, is the particle size. Clay is the finest particle, and it packs together very tightly, so it doesn't allow water to go through. It retains water very well. This is sand and silt collected from a riverbed. See how it just easily moves through, and it is not good at retaining water. Should I fill this with water, it would typically just filter right through. We can test the composition and texture of our soil in various ways. Number one, you can just stick your hand in the soil and just take a good look at it. You can also use a lab test over at CSU Extension or whatever local extension agency you have. Get a good, deep digging of your soil. Try to get as much organic matter and deep roots out of there as possible. Usually what you should do is lay it out for about a day and let it dry, and then you collect it into a Ziploc bag like this. You want to get about 3 good scoops in 3 different locations minimum, typically up to 6. You'll fill the bag about halfway, and you'll put the details of where you collected the sample, when, and what type of soil test you're seeking. You can find this information at CSU Extension's website, and you can fill out the form and send it to them, and they will send you the results telling you specifically the mineral content and nutrient content of your soil, and all the way down to the organic matter and trace minerals like zinc and things like that. So you can actually tell if you're having difficulty growing, what is your problem, and they will give you the remedies in the results. After receiving your results from a soil test or checking the soil out yourself, you can determine what the composition of your soil is and what your soil needs. After that, you can actually determine what kind of amendments are required to make your soil more satisfiable to your plants. So, there are many different things that qualify as an amendment, and anything that is an amendment is like compost, potting soil, perlite, coconut coir, even sand or clay. Those could count as amendments. And an amendment is anything that you mix into the soil to change its texture or nutrient value or aeration ability or any of those things. And so you actually want to make sure you do that before you have established plants. So the spring and the fall are typically the best times to amend your soil. So I always typically go with organic things like compost as the original amendment for the day in the spring. And I'll always add like maybe a bag or 2 per bed so that I have that original 5% organic matter we were talking about before. If you reach that magic number, you've really got a good amount, and it's going to be able to feed your plants for the rest of the summer. So we can amend the soil in various ways to solve issues with drainage, texture, nutrient availability, pH, compaction, aeration, water retention, and all sorts of other things. The main goal of amending is to provide a better environment for your roots. That is the main reason, and that is the #1 priority. So pay attention to what your soil needs before you do any amending. For example, if you have wood ash, that's not a very good amendment for this environment because that is a very high in pH value, and the soil here is actually very high in pH value already. So we don't want to add more pH to the already high pH value. These are maybe pretty high-tech concepts, but if you get your soil tested and sent to a lab, they can tell you what to do before you ever get this done. Texture is actually really determined by topsoil, even like organic mixes. You can also have things like sand and clay to change the texture of your soil. If it's really too drainy, if it's not actually draining enough, rather, up here is a major problem. We have too much clay, so you might actually consider a little bit of sand. Sometimes organic matter is actually good at doing that too, though, so it's good to consider all the options. For drainage and aeration, you might actually consider things like volcanic rock, or perlite, or vermiculite. These things are actually really good at helping you to avoid overwatering. Whenever you have a problem with too little oxygen in your soil or too much water, it's good to consider things like perlite to actually help get that water down and seeping deeper and deeper into your soil. So if you have plants that are just stunting because they seem to not be going anywhere, it's maybe because you're watering them too often and they're not draining enough. Also, it's really good to consider things like coconut coir or peat moss for water retention. These things are really good at holding in water, but they don't have any nutrient value, so it's not going to burn your plants, it's not going to change very much nutrient composition in your soil. But it is going to help you with the water retention, which is really nice. This stuff is actually kind of spongy and very good at retaining that water. I also want to use this time to kind of stress the difference between organics and synthetics. Some synthetics are not harmful, like you've got vermiculite and perlite. These are synthetic compounds. These are not naturally occurring. People have to collect them and then burn them, fire them. But they're not necessarily harmful for your plot because they're not really nutrient dense or sapping of any nutrients. They just kind of help with the water retention. So it's really good to keep in mind the differences of the synthetic and organic. Organics are more reliably going to not harm your thing. You have kind of more of a buffer zone and you can kind of, go a little more willy-nilly with them. But anything that's organic, like say neem oil, doesn't really mean that it's not going to hurt your plants. You still need to read the instructions, follow them. You just have a little bit more leeway. So we have plenty of examples of soil amendments from actually guano, which is pat dung. We have deer manure, cow manure. We have compost. We have perlite, ashes, biochar, charcoal, peat moss, or coconut coir. There's also things like diatomaceous earth, which is like a floury compound that actually cuts up pests and kills them throughout your plot. So if you have like a problem with mites, diatomaceous earth is actually a really good amendment to add to your soil and do a top dressing of. You can even consider things like potting soil or topsoil from the store are also really good amendments. If you just need something to add texture or just fill up space, it's not a bad idea to get something like this. Make sure it's organic, make sure it's got all the nutrients you need and it's got in the balance that you're looking for. If you don't want to change up the nutrient value, then get something that's not organic or living. Just get something that's just totally dead and inert. You can even consider things like worm poo, which we like to call vermiculite, which is actually the best amendment in my opinion, because it is anything coming out of the backside of a worm typically is really good for the environment. And we actually typically brew compost tea out of that. So remember, we can amend the soil in various different ways with various different products to solve all sorts of different problems, such as compaction, aeration issues, drainage issues, nutrient issues, and texture issues. So remember, the main reason is to provide a good environment for the roots. So remember, the three main takeaways for today are to put the right plant in the right place, remember the 4 essentials of every plant: water, sun, soil, and oxygen, and that it all comes back to the soil. My name's Ellis, and I'll be teaching this series throughout the summer for New Roots Co. You'll be able to find the series on our website at newrootsco.org, along with our podcast series, which is New Roots Community Radio Hour. Again, that's newrootsco.org, and feel free to send me any questions or concerns at info@newrootsco.org. Thank you.